When discussions are had about environmentally conscious countries, Norway often makes its way into the conversation, as it is one of the world leaders in sustainable practices, such as the use of renewable energy, green technologies, and zero emissions incentives. But how does Norwegian media cover the issue of climate change? And does that coverage have a bearing on public opinion? And finally, how does this compare to how the media handles climate issues in Australia? These are all questions that this analysis aims to answer. So, what do Norway's economic and political systems look like? As of 2023, Norway boasts one of the world's highest per capita incomes, with a considerably low unemployment rate of 3.1%, resulting in what is categorised as a very high Human Development Index of 0.961, thus causing the nation to be ranked just below Sweden as the second best country to live in within the United Nations Development Report 2022. These impressive figures can be largely attributed to the country's wealth obtained through the abundance of natural gas and petroleum deposits, situated in the Norwegian region of the North Sea. Formally, the country's political system is categorised as a parliamentary, representative, democratic, constitutional monarchy. And in 2022, the Economist Intelligence Unit gave Norway the rating of full democracy. In Norway, the king is predominantly a figurehead and does not have the power to make legislative or executive decisions. Instead, executive power is held by the cabinet, led by the Prime Minister of the country. This position is currently held by Jonas Gahr Store of the Labour Party, who replaced the Conservative Party's Erna Solberg, who resigned in 2021. Legislative power is possessed by both the government in power and the Norwegian Parliament, known as the Storting, which is elected within a multi-party system. Norway's media landscape is considered to be one of the freest on the planet, and as per the Reporters Without Borders World Press Freedom Index, it is ranked at number 1 in the world for journalistic freedom. Members of Norwegian society are keen newsreaders, with a report by Statistics Norway 2023 stating that 64% of Norwegians claim to spend some time reading online newspapers every day. It also possesses the highest number of individuals willing to pay to access online news sources, with 41% of the population stating that they would be willing to do so in a 2022 Reuters Institute survey. The national newspapers that Norwegian residents are mostly subscribed to, ranked by readership, are Verdens Gang, which is a tabloid paper, which claims to have no political alignment. It is owned by Schibsted Media Group, which is a public company. Just under 2 million people access Verdens Gang's website per day. This is a very large number, considering the fact that Norway's entire population is only 5 million. Aftenposten, a daily newspaper with a conservative centre-right political stance. This is also owned by Schibsted Media. Dagbladet. This is also a tabloid-style newspaper, but is known within Norwegian society to take a progressive liberal stance on issues. It is owned by Alla Media, which is a private company. Klassekampen, which directly translates to The Class Struggle, is a daily newspaper that takes a very strong left-wing stance on things, and has a strong focus on the coverage of climate change. With regards to television news, the public broadcaster NRK holds the highest viewership and trust rating in the country. In 2022, NRK made the switch from being funded by a TV licensing fee to a dedicated television tax. Coming in second is commercial channel TV2, which is owned by Schibsted Media Company, dominator of commercial media in Norway, who were previously mentioned as the owners of both Verdens Gang and Aftenposten. There are also non-news broadcast channels with a smaller viewership, such as TV Norge, Fem, Max, and Vox, who are owned by US company Warner Brothers. According to Ita Staden Bodka, the Norwegian general election campaign in September 2021 was dominated by climate change. Coined by many as the climate election, this campaign resulted in an ousting of Conservative Prime Minister Erna Solberg, with voters turning to Labour leader Jonas Gahr Store, who highlighted the hypocrisy surrounding the country's environmental sustainability ambitions. Now, what is being referred to financial here reliance is Norway's on its abundant revenue fund and gas 12 billion kroner, which converts to approximately 1.3 trillion US dollars. The fund was established in the 1990s after one of the world's largest offshore oil fields was discovered 20 years earlier in the Norwegian territory of the North Sea. The nation uses this money to purchase holdings in roughly 9,000 companies across the globe, and to fund social costs, worth around 250,000 US dollars per citizen. A much smaller portion of the money goes towards renewable energy infrastructure. By diversifying their investment portfolio across a vast number of industries, Norway has been able to give the fund stability, as there is less risk of monetary loss if the cost of fossil fuels begins to fall. In 2015, Norwegian society undertook what is referred to as the Green Shift, in which journalists from Norwegian media outlets began to strive to influence societal outlook on climate change. They executed this by reframing the manner that Ytterstad and Bodka refer to as the slow, uneven, global, and partially invisible process of climate change. Norwegian journalists noticed that one of the reasons responsible for the lack of adequate climate change reporting is the fact that most news is episodic as opposed to being thematic, meaning that unless some sort of drastic natural disaster occurs, creating an unignorable physical impact on the nation, climate change rarely makes its way into the headlines as often as it should. Upon making this realization, Anders Bjartnes, editor of Energy og Klima, along with other fellow Nordic climate journalists, made it their mission to ensure that climate change remains a consistently newsworthy issue, even when its effects don't seem to be so in your face to the average citizen. In 2021, E24, Norway's leading online business news supplier, formed a brand new editorial team, along with a dedicated section of the newspaper titled The Green Shift, that solely covers climate-related issues. Articles from this section of the paper are often featured within the leading national newspapers, with the majority of reporting on climate change so far in 2023 being done by Aftenposten. Contrary to what people may be led to believe, due to Norway being ranked as one of the most, if not the most, sustainable country in the world, Norwegians aren't as climate conscious as they are often perceived to be. According to a 2019 poll published by newspaper Bergens Tidende, only 49% of Norwegians think that the temperature rise during the last 100 years is higher than what it has been for the last 1,000 years. For comparison, approximately 70% of those surveyed from other European countries believe this to be true. Statistics also show that only 16% of Norwegians believe climate change to be an immediate threat to them, and 17% think that it never will be. The way that the Norwegian media portrays climate change could very well be influenced by the country's long-standing reliance on fossil fuel revenue. In an article published in Aftenposten in 2015, Christiana Figueres stated that Norway must figure out what the transition is beyond oil and gas, not in 1 or 2 years, not abruptly, but certainly in the medium term, because we will be using some fossil fuels in the long term. This exhibits that although Norwegian media, specifically the centre-right Aftenposten, does not neglect to report on the importance of a switch to more sustainable practices, it does fail to adequately highlight the true urgency of the climate crisis, thus possibly playing a part in the mindset held by the Norwegian public, which is that climate change is present and measures must be undertaken to tackle its effects. However, many believe this whilst also greatly underestimating the rate at which climate change is occurring and how it is going to impact our planet. So, how does Norwegian media coverage of climate change differ to Australian coverage? With regards to the impact of media coverage on public beliefs surrounding climate issues, Ryhag and Shovskold aver that studies of public perceptions of climate change demonstrate that public opinions are largely influenced by this balanced reporting. What they are referring to is the tendency of news sources to give equal platforms to both qualified climate scientists and climate skeptics and deniers, in order to give what is considered to be a balanced viewpoint. The downside of this is that putting the voices and opinions of climate deniers who consistently make baseless statements and are often not formally educated on the subject, next to highly educated climate scientists who have dedicated a large portion of their lives to fact-based research, isn't actually very fair after all, as it often gives people the perception that these climate deniers have the same level of credibility as the scientists, which is simply false and misleading. This notion of balance is taken advantage of by Australian media giant and billionaire Rupert Murdoch, who owns a 70% monopoly of the country's media. Murdoch, who happens to be a major equity shareholder in the fossil fuel industry, is largely responsible for the permeation of climate misinformation within the Australian news industry. His publications are the most highly circulated in the country, such as the Herald Sun, the Sydney Morning Herald, and the Australian, and are notorious for greatly favouring the use of fossil fuels, and for constantly spreading doubt regarding the science surrounding climate change and renewable energy alternatives. In fact, a study undertaken by award-winning investigative journalist Wendy Bacon shows that for over 2 decades, approximately 45% of Murdoch media climate coverage was skeptical of climate change, and in many cases took a stance of complete denial of its existence. Murdoch's spreading of misinformation has proven to be effective in some regards, as the Climate for the Nation report indicates that on average, Australians believe that the mining industry employs 8.2% of the nation's workforce. In reality, that figure actually stands at 0.2%. Now, compared to Norway's approach to climate change coverage, Australia definitely comes across as more malicious and intentionally deceptive. As in Australia, its leading news sources are intentionally trying to downplay the existence of climate change through ardently denying scientific facts and by giving platforms to full-blown, unqualified skeptics. For example, here is a skynews.com.au article that makes the claim in its headline that few scientists would say that climate change is an existential threat. This statement is baseless, and the article that follows offers no scientific evidence to validate it, nor does it expand on what it means by few scientists. Whereas in Norway, the emphasis put on the climate emergency is lacking, but nowhere near as purposefully deceptive as Australia's media. In Norway, journalists are also making an effort to better inform the country's citizens about the true facts surrounding climate change, doing so by increasing accessibility of knowledge via dedicating newspaper sections to articles regarding the topic, written by journalists who specialise in climate issues and regularly consult with reputable climate scientists. Upon exploring the media landscapes of both Norway and Australia, it can be inferred that the way in which the two countries' media systems approach climate change is very different. Whilst Australian news giant Rupert Murdoch aims to dispel the truth surrounding the climate emergency in order to continue to line his own pockets, Norwegian media outlets are striving to better inform citizens of the real dangers of climate change, in the hopes of shifting the news cycle in order to empower Norwegians with factual knowledge regarding our world's climate.